My name is Grace Whitmore. I'm 74 years old, and I've lived in the same weathered house tucked behind a cornfield in rural Ohio for most of my life. Folks around here know me as the quiet woman with the red porch swing, the one who bakes too much pie and never leaves town. But there's a part of my story I've never told anyone. Not my church friends. Not the grandkids who think I was always this calm. Some truths sink so deep into your bones that speaking them feels like ripping skin. Still, I believe some secrets should die with us. Others need to be told so no one else has to carry them. Mine is the kind that's burned in my chest for 60 years, waiting for a voice. I wasn't born into love. I was born into silence, the kind of silence that hums under your skin and teaches you early on that asking questions is dangerous. I came into this world in the spring. 11 brothers, most older than me, and one father whose word was law from sunrise to sunset. My mother died when I was just 3, and the woman who came next never looked me in the eye unless it was to tell me to keep quiet. We lived on a farm with white fences and Sunday prayers, the kind of place that looked perfect in a postcard. But what happens inside those pretty houses isn't always what folks imagine. Behind closed doors, rules can twist into cages. My father was respected, feared, and even admired by the men in town. He built things with his hands and broke them just as fast when he was crossed. And under his roof, we lived by one rule: protect the family, no matter what. I followed that rule until it nearly destroyed me. Until the day if you're willing to listen, I'm ready to speak. Because someone out there might need to know that even the worst kind of secret can be dragged into the light. Our farm sat on 75 acres of flat land outside a little town called Reedville. Nothing but soybean fields and gravel roads for miles. You could stand on the porch and see nothing but sky, which made it feel like the world ended right at our fence. Daddy built the house himself, a long rectangular thing with 3 wings, like an old hospital. The boys lived in the east and west wings. I stayed in the center, just down the hall from Mama Ruth and Daddy, in a small room with lace curtains and a single wooden bed. It was always clean, always quiet. Too quiet, really. I remember how I could hear the clock ticking from the hallway when the house settled at night. Daddy ran. The boys headed to their fields before the sun even touched the barn roof, and I stayed behind with Mama Ruth to clean, cook, and wash. She never spoke much. She kept her eyes down and her hands busy, always folding something, scrubbing something, as if staying in motion would keep her safe. I learned early that questions were not welcome. Each of the boys had chores assigned by age. The older ones fixed tractors and managed livestock. The younger ones hauled feed, mended fences, and did whatever else Daddy barked out that morning. They slept 2 to a room on creaky metal cots, their boots always lined up straight beneath them. My room was the only one with a lock, though I was told it was to keep me safe, not to keep anyone out. I believed that for a while. We didn't have neighbors close by. The closest house was a 30-minute walk through. He said cities were full of filth and weak men who didn't know how to keep their families in line. He controlled everything. What we ate, what we wore when we spoke, and how we behaved. Even laughter had a curfew. I wasn't allowed to be alone with any of the boys, even the youngest. I couldn't wear dresses above the knee or shirts without collars. Daddy said girls had to carry themselves like glass, always careful, always clean. At the dinner table, Daddy sat at the head with his Bible beside the salt shaker. No one spoke until he did. If a fork scraped too loudly or someone dropped a napkin, he'd look up with those pale eyes, and the room would fall into stillness. The boys rarely looked at me. When they did, it was quick sideways, like they weren't sure they were supposed to. I didn't think much of it back then. I just figured it was part of growing up in a house full of men and one girl. But something about the silence didn't feel restful. It felt expectant, like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something none of us dared name. It was a Friday evening just after supper when Caleb knocked on the side of the chicken coop where I was gathering eggs. He never came out there. Not once in all the years I'd tended those hens did he step foot past the fence, let alone call my name in that slow, almost gentle voice. I turned, startled, clutching the basket against my chest. He told me Daddy wanted to see me in the back room near the workshop. That was strange. Daddy never sent for me unless it was about chores or Sunday clothes. I followed him without thinking, barefoot in the dirt, the eggs bumping gently against each other. The sun was low, stretching long shadows across the fields, and the air smelled like hay and rust. We passed the barn and the feed troughs and came around the far side of the house where the tool shed connected to an old storage room. I had only been in there once years ago when Mama Ruth stored apples for winter. I remembered the cold air and the stone floor. He opened the door and motioned for me to step inside. The light was low, just one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was a chair in the middle of the room, clean and empty, and the smell of something sweet like pipe tobacco, though Daddy never smoked. I didn't hear the door close, but I felt it, that soft pull of air as the space sealed behind me. Caleb stood near the wall now, arms crossed, his face unreadable. Another brother stepped in, then another, and another. I knew all their names. I'd grown up watching them haul hayskin rabbits and wrestle in the fields. But now they looked like strangers. They moved. My chest tightened so fast I thought my ribs would crack. I asked what was going on, why they were all there, and what Daddy wanted. Nobody answered. Not a word, just breathing and boots on concrete. I remember the scrape of a chair leg and the sound of the latch clicking on the inside of the door. That's when I knew. Something had been planned for me, and there was no one coming to stop it. I don't remember how long I sat in that room before the first hand touched me. It felt wrong, not just because of what was happening, but because it was done with a kind of quiet certainty. Like this had been decided long before I ever knew it. He didn't look at me. None of them did. They moved like they were following instructions, not just acting on some sudden impulse. When the second one stepped forward, I still held on to the idea that maybe this was a mistake. But she didn't. No one did. The door stayed shut, and the light stayed dim, and the silence became louder than anything I had ever known. By the third brother, I stopped speaking. I stopped moving. I just closed my eyes and waited because my body had already gone somewhere else. It was no longer mine. It belonged to the house, to the rules, to the routine no one ever dared break. I remember counting the footsteps, thinking that if I could just keep track, it might mean something later. But I lost count around 5. They came and went like workers on a shift. And the worst part was that they didn't act cruel. They weren't laughing or yelling or saying anything at all. It was routine, practiced, familiar. When it was over, I stayed curled on the floor until someone opened the door and told me to clean up before Daddy came home. She looked at me, then looked away. I wanted her to say something, anything, but she didn't. She just reached for another carrot. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just them. It was all of them. And I was completely alone. Charlie was different. He didn't look at me the way the others did, and he never came near that back room. He was only 15 younger than most of the boys, but there was something in his eyes that told me he already knew more than he wanted to. He spent most of his time near the pond behind the cornfield, sitting on the edge of the dock, with a fishing rod he rarely used. I started watching him quietly from the kitchen window when I was supposed to be shelling peas. He never seemed in a rush like the rest of them, and he flinched when Daddy raised his voice. One morning but his eyes lingered a moment longer than usual, and for the first time in weeks I felt something shift inside me, like a thread tugging loose from a knot. Over the next few days, we started to share glances. Nothing bold, nothing that would get either of us in trouble. Just small, careful acknowledgments that we were both still here, still watching. I began timing my chores near the pond, carrying laundry to the line when I knew he'd be down by the water. The first time we spoke, it was about the catfish. He said they were stubborn, hard to catch. I said I knew the feeling. We kept our conversations short-hushed under the buzz of cicadas. But with each word, I felt less invisible. He never asked what had happened to me. He didn't need to. I could tell by the way he lowered his eyes when my sleeve slipped back, and he told me he didn't like what the others did. Said he'd seen enough to know it wasn't right. His voice trembled a little, but he didn't look away. That was the first time I cried without hiding. Not loud, not messy. just quiet tears that slipped down while I stared at the water. He didn't touch me. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. In that moment, Charlie became more than a brother. He became a thread of hope I didn't know I still had. And even though we didn't speak of plans or promises, I started to believe there might be a way out. Not alone, but maybe, just maybe, with him. Daddy brought home the recorder one Thursday evening. He said it was for his contracts to keep track of what people promised him. I watched him test it at the table, pressing buttons with that same authority he used on everything he touched. It was big and silver, with a small... I mentioned the recorder and how clearly it picked up sound. He didn't say anything right away, just stared at the dirt like it held the answer. Then he said, quiet as a breath, that it might be our only chance. We planned in whispers over 2 days. He'd distract one of the older boys during dinner and sneak the recorder into the back room. I'd make sure it was running before they came for me. The plan was risky. If anyone found out, if Daddy caught wind of it, it wouldn't just be me who paid, but I could see the decision harden in Charlie's face. He said he'd deliver it to Daddy himself, pretend he found it under a pile of hay the next morning. Said he'd act shocked, like a good son who'd uncovered something awful and wanted to help. We didn't shake hands or hug or promise anything out loud. We just looked at each other and nodded. And for the first time in my life, the recorder fit perfectly beneath the old wooden chair in the corner. I placed it there just before sundown, heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear. I covered it with a folded cloth and left the mic angled toward the center of the room. Charlie had already distracted Ezra in the barn. He gave me a quick glance as I slipped into the back room, just a flicker of recognition, like we were soldiers crossing lines. When I closed the door behind me, I could feel the air thicken. The boys came in like they always did, boots our heavy faces blank. But this time, I wasn't just their sister. I was the witness. Every sound burned into that little red light. My breath, their footsteps, the awful silence that wrapped around everything. I kept my eyes on the ceiling, imagining the tape rolling, spinning, holding every second in its grip. I didn't cry. And somehow, knowing it was being recorded made it bearable. Not easier, not less painful, but purposeful. When it ended, I waited until the last one left before slipping the cloth back over the recorder and stepping outside. My legs shook the whole way to the washroom, but my spine stayed straight. Charlie met me later near the fence. He didn't speak, just took the recorder from my hands and nodded once. That night, I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry either, because something had finally changed. The next morning, I sat on the porch with a cup of weak coffee, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Charlie walked up the gravel path with the recorder in his satchel. He looked calm, like someone walking into a storm they've already made peace with. I watched him knock on Daddy's office door, saw the way Daddy barely looked up before motioning him inside. Then the shouting started. Daddy's voice tore through the walls like a shotgun blast. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was pure fire. He wasn't shocked because I'd been hurt. He was enraged that it had happened without his permission behind his back on his land. He yelled for the boys one by one. I saw them march across the yard, heads down, not asking questions. One by one, they disappeared through that door. The shouting grew louder, more violent, like he was trying to erase the evidence with sheer volume. I sat still on that porch, gripping my cup, listening to my own name mixed into the fury. Not once did he call for me. Not once did he ask if what he heard was true or how I felt. It wasn't about me. It was about power and how it had slipped from his hands without him noticing. Through the crack in the window, I saw him slam the recorder against the desk. Pieces flew. One of the boys tried to speak, but Daddy raised. Mama Ruth stood in the hallway for a moment. Her apron was stained, and her eyes were tired. She looked at me, then turned away again. I wasn't surprised. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, the boys filed out like soldiers who had failed their commanding officer. No one looked at me, not even Charlie. Daddy didn't speak to me for 3 days. Not a word. But everything changed after that. Doors were locked, rules were tightened, and the back room stayed empty. He didn't save me. He simply shut it down like a business gone wrong. and somehow that hurt even more. The room was burned 2 weeks later. No one ever said who did it, but I saw the smoke rise from the back corner of the property and knew. By the time we reached it, the chair was nothing but ash, and the stone floor had cracked from the heat. Daddy said it was an accident. Someone left a lamp too close to the curtain, not in the way I hoped, but enough to breathe. I was moved into a new room upstairs with a real bed and a lock I could use from the inside. Charlie became Daddy's right-hand man. He ran the farm like a young foreman, quiet and precise. He never mentioned the tape again, not even in passing, but he started bringing me my favorite peaches when they came in season. The boys grew into men and scattered over time. Some joined the army, some married, and most didn't come back. Holidays were quieter. No one talked about that summer, not even in whispers. Mama Ruth died 10 years later. I sat by her side, held her hand, and still she never spoke of what she saw. She just looked past me, eyes cloudy and tired, as if her silence was all she had left. I've lived a full life since then in my own quiet way. I planted roses. I learned to play piano. I taught liberation doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it's a single step, a cracked door, a broken tape that tells the truth. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever